Welcome to the Neo-Masculine Minutes podcast show, where my co-host Dan Ploger and myself, John Protek, discuss the truth about unreliable information. In this current age of rapid-fire information, people are growing weary of biased personal opinions, outrageous ideological narratives, outright lies, and intentional propaganda meant to divide us. Dan and I wonder, when will people fall for the truth? When will they reject the informational threats that are destroying families, ruining societies, and destroying cultures all around the world? Welcome back to another episode of Neo-Masculine Minutes. I'm here with my co-host and partner in conversation and critical thought, Dan Ploger. But before we get started today, we got a really good show today, Conspiracies and Probabilities. Before we get started, I just want to say my relationship with my co-host is going on a decade. And during that time, we've spent thousands of hours discussing issues and narratives and history and, all kinds of things, politics, genders. And I got to tell you, Dan has never, ever talked about a conspiracy, never suggested a conspiracy. He's not a conspiracy guy, and neither am I. We're all about critical thinking and logic and reason. So I just want you to know that's kind of a disclaimer. And if you already don't get that by now, maybe you will after this discussion. But I've got 3 questions for Dan, and it all has to do with Thomas Matthew Crooks, the guy that was on top of the rooftop 2 weeks ago today, actually, and fired off 8 rounds. One of them tragically killed somebody. One of them grazed the president's ear, and who knows where the other rounds went. I should say we do know where they went because 2 people got seriously injured that were there for former President Trump's rally. So here's the questions, and there's 3 of them. And then Dan's going to use, by the way, he's a scientist by trade, so he's got some good answers to these. Think about these questions.
Okay.
What are the chances that you would ever be in a BlackRock commercial? That's question number 1. Question number 2, what are the chances that a BlackRock commercial participant would be involved in an assassination attempt of a former American president? It's question number 2. And question number 3, which kind of ties this all up, what are the chances that the United States Secret Service would leave a rooftop unattended with a clear view to a podium where the leading candidate for a presidential election is addressing at a rally his supporters? What say ye, Dan, to those 3 questions? What would be your answers to those? Explain it to the listeners too, how probabilities and products and all that work. But
well, a little tongue in cheek, John. I'd say that the chances of being involved in a BlackRock commercial were 1 in 320 million, which is the population of the United States. So that's pretty slim odds to begin with.
Man.
The second is why would somebody involved in a BlackRock commercial be involved in an assassination attempt? My God, maybe you make that. Well, the last assassination attempt we had was Ronald Reagan. So that was 10 years ago. Or no, that was 20, 30, 40 years ago. My gosh, time flies. 40 years ago. So I'd say that 40 times the population of the United States was about 1 billion. So we're now at 320 trillion. And what was the third condition?
Third one was, what are the chances that the U.S. Secret Service would leave a rooftop unattended with a clear view to the podium where the leading presidential candidate is rallying his supporters?
Yeah, and the answer to that is 50%.
Yeah, probably the lowest for that, the lowest probability. But so how does that work? So you got yeah.
Because of our DEI or DIE hiring practices, yeah, I'd give that one about a 50%.
Well, there you go. So how does that work then? So you have these probabilities, some astronomical, some not so much. How does that work? And how does this create the perception of a conspiracy?
Yeah.
Not that it is, but how does it create that perception?
I don't know. The whole thing is a total mystery. And of course, what we're saying there beforehand was a little tongue in cheek. But we do have to, even the layman has to admit that the chances are probably pretty slim that such a person would be involved in a BlackRock commercial. A Bud Light commercial would be one thing, but a BlackRock commercial where the head of BlackRock is notoriously a, DEI and ESG proponent in he was trying to force the world into accepting social reasons, social concerns involved in investing is equally important as the financial returns of investments. Only that argument doesn't carry water. Nobody buys into it. But nonetheless, and I think it's been well established that the whole Marxist philosophy, the whole woke philosophy is literally a mind virus that denies reality and tries to create a false reality to those who are willing to buy into somebody's imagination in that matter.
Yeah, that's a great point because we were talking about that in one of our conversations. Why does mainstream media want people to endorse and support fantasy? I mean, stories and narratives that can't be proven by fact not to digress, but like a man could be a woman. I mean, that's a fantasy. And to see mainstream media and even like you just alluded to, BlackRock buying into these changing societal norms for what purpose? To keep us all confused, to keep us divided, which leads us to the power and control issue. And also, a house divided will fall. And there's a lot of division taking place around the globe these days. There's people that have bought in who have taken the path of least resistance, not given any due diligence to what's going on when they hear a story or a narrative, and then they fall lockstep with those that are creating these false narratives. So we've got a global situation now that that just seems out of hand. I mean, and I laugh because if you don't laugh, you'd go insane just looking at all the ridiculous things that people have fallen into. Yeah, climate change is happening, but it's been happening for billions of years, and most of the time without the burning of fossil fuels. Figure that one out.
Yes, exactly. The climate has been changing ever since it existed. So let's not tear our hair out and go and scream that the sky is falling.
Yeah, and so we take these three probabilities and then we multiply them together. Is that how the algebra works?
Yeah, that's great. If you have two probabilities, the sum is the product of the two happening together is the product of the two probabilities.
So when we add even the third one in, I mean, so it's take the first question, multiply it by the second question, multiply it by the third question. The chances are this points to some kind of, and they use the word conspiracy theorist or something, right? No, it's not. It's somebody that's using logic and reason. So I would say people that understand algebra and understand science like you do and understand probabilities probably are on to something. I mean, it brings back memories of, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson always figuring stuff out, basing their conclusions solely on deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning and all of it together. It was always astounding to me. Elementary, my dear Watson, they'd come up with something, Basil Rathbone, what classics, you ought to check those out. But he would come up with something, and then Watson would just look dumbfounded, and then he would just get it after it was explained to him. So, Dan and I know that human beings, for the most part, uh, are intelligent when they're given the time to think about things. We all know that everybody's been blessed with intuition. And I got to say, Dan, as a former, I was never a marksman. Actually, I was an expert with the M16. But I know that when I saw when the smoke cleared and it was a guy on top of a roof, less than 200 yards away, with a clear line view, I even said to my wife, because we were watching it live, I said, man, that's not just a lone wolf. There's something more to that. With all of that law enforcement, to include, local law enforcement, but U.S. Secret Service, but with witnesses that saw this guy scaling the roof or getting on a roof or on the roof with a weapon a long time before he started popping off rounds, it just smells like there's a skunk in the kitchen or something. We'll make up a new one, but something's not right with that, man. Just something's not right.
Yeah, that the famous smell test, sniff test. Yeah, exactly. And there's the coincidence of him being in a BlackRock commercial. Um, to me, the fact that he was trying to make that shot with open sights, um, that that has a smell of lack of good judgment on his part. Why would you try and take a shot if you're doing that? You know that you're about to do something that'll, which in the books, along with Lee Harvey Oswald, why on earth, why on earth would you use a substandard rifle to do the job? And it appears to me that he probably didn't have a spotter. He probably had his windage wrong, I would suggest, and that he missed all the shots because of windage problems and just inherent inaccuracies. But thank God for that. But the whole thing, from one direction, smells of professionalism and involvement by people in the know, and on the other hand, it reeks of amateurism. So I really don't know what to think about it, other than number one, it was a complete and total failure on the part of the Secret Service, which is supposed to be the premier protective service in the world, and they demonstrated in the worst possible way that they are incompetent. I don't know how they'll ever overcome that. They're trying to use it that now as a means to hamper Trump's ability to hold outdoor rallies, which is a big trademark of his. So the whole thing, none of it really smells very good at all, John. There's a skunk in the wood pile, as you say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it kind of brings us back to what neo-masculine is really all about. It's not the definition that you find on Google or on the internet where it says in order to be a man, in order to be masculine and to embrace masculinity, a man has to accept changing social norms, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier, and has to accept narratives that make no sense logically or critically or with a reason. And so that definition in and of itself, the internet definition, neo-masculine man, emasculates men right off the bat and forces him to accept lies. So if integrity is the foundation of all human interaction, or should be, needs to be, then you're already creating a world of lying men. And when a man lies, he may not admit it, but it takes away a little bit of his power, probably all of his power, because it deals with integrity. So our version, Dan's and my version, and the team that we've got with us, our version of neo-masculinity is actually an information analysis initiative where men have the tools to identify unreliable information, but also for them to step into their nature defined role as a man, masculine man, which is to protect his loved ones, whether it's a family or a village or whatever it is. A masculine man's primary purpose, as defined by nature, is to protect. And then if the mastodons and the saber-toothed tigers are not running around, and we've got as threats, and the threat today is information, unreliable information, then it would seem to me that in order to be masculine, you have to know how to identify, not just identify, but reject nonsense. So I'm going to reject, and publicly today, right? I'm going to reject that this was a lone wolf and that there's something more to this. And we may or may not ever get the answer, because if all the cooks in the kitchen are there to put poison in the spaghetti sauce, then you're never going to get the answer. And what's going to happen is the people like us that raise questions are going to slowly get bumped off one by one as we eat this contaminated spaghetti. So it's not a coincidence. And call me whatever you want. I really don't care. But use your critical thinking skills that nature gave you. Any closing thoughts, Dan, about that or anything?
Just to remember that, everybody needs to take a step back at this situation, the entire assassination, and recognize and start listening. What are those things that are part of this that you mentioned earlier and we talked about? But there are other things too. Why did the head of the FBI try to diminish in his mind the importance of this by saying it probably wasn't a bullet that hit his ear? It may well have been shrapnel. What difference does it make? Number one. Number two, does anybody know of exploding 223 rounds? I haven't seen any. So there's just another question, and there's questions upon questions upon questions. And to anybody who's trying to put together the facts and create some sort of cogent summary of what happened, you're not going to do it with the facts that have been presented. It's necessary not only to evaluate what we've been told, it's necessary to go beyond that and think of what other reasonable explanations exist.
Yeah, great points. And that's something to contemplate. That I think that's a distraction to take us away, to take our eye off the ball or off the carrot or whatever. And, if we go to the 36 stratagems, and I'm not sure if any of you listeners have read them, we hope that you do someday. But if you go with the 36 stratagems, that distraction tactic is found in there. What I would like to do as we close this conversation is we implore everybody, especially the men, to visit neomasculinity.solutions. Dan and I have created a Sentinel handbook. It's a very inexpensive ebook, but it's packed with a lot of information. And I would suggest it's a great foundational thing to have in your arsenal as a man seeking to protect his family against unreliable information. So visit there, pick yourself up a copy of the Sentinel handbook, and get started, guys, on your journey to reclaim your masculinity and to do the things that you were put on earth to do, which is a protector and a sentinel nowadays of information. Dan, good seeing you, brother. And
hey, good seeing you, John.
Thanks for your answers. We'll see you on the next one. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Neo Masculine Minutes with Dan Ploger and myself. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Neo-Masculine Minutes podcast show. For the men, it's simple. Think for yourself. Dig deep. Reach down. We appreciate your earnestness in wanting to embrace your masculinity again. You are indeed the sentinels of information. The people you care about are waiting for your leadership, hoping you step up to fulfill your masculine role as protectors of the human race, to save it from any further destruction caused by unreliable information.